Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle, Chief of Staff at BookPal, and I have a confession to make. I am not the best at networking. So, for this reason, I'm very excited to have Karen Wickre, author of Taking the Work Out of Networking, here with me today. So, Karen is a Silicon Valley veteran and former editorial director at Twitter, a job that she landed after a decade-long career at Google. She's an advisor to startups and lifelong information seeker. She's a member of the board of visitors for the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships at Stanford University and serves on the board of International Center for Journalists, to name a few. She's been a featured columnist for Wired.com and is the co-founder of Newsgeist, an annual conference fostering new approaches to news and information. So to kick things off, Karen will begin with a presentation on her book, Taking the Work Out of Networking. Then we'll have a little chat. So feel free to submit any questions you have for Karen anytime during the webinar. And same as always, we'll be sending out the recording. So if you need to jump out early, that's totally fine. All right, Karen, let's do this.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So here we have Making Connections That Count, a title that I prefer to networking. A little bit about me. I am an introvert, but I'm not shy. Introverts need time to think and be alone to regroup and process more than extroverts do, but not necessarily shy. I wrote a book, this book on a better way to network, because over the years I've managed to build up a wonderful network of colleagues and friends around the world. Really, I don't have magic powers. It's not something that only I can do, and so I wanted to detail in a book how I connect and keep in touch with lots of people, and the rewards that it has given me, and why I think it's important for other people to do in an ongoing way, and how I think you can benefit from it. Here's the book about all of this. So when I started, I asked lots of my friends and actually people, contacts online, what do you hate about networking? Why do you hate it so much? The answers were very similar, right? It seems phony. It's too transactional, sort of a tit for tat situation that is very awkward and feels very superficial, not meaningful, not rewarding. And usually you don't get what you want. It, in fact, the word networking, doesn't matter whether you're an introvert or not, it elicits very strong reactions, right? Like this one. I couldn't resist. Yeah, people are just avoidant. So one reason is that we panic because we only think about having to do it as a chore, right? When we really need to do it, and that means like you suddenly lose a job. Your company is downsizing, or there's new management that you don't like or agree with. There's some kind of industry pivot that makes your role redundant. Suddenly, that's when you think you need to be in networking mode, which is not a good position to be in. Another reason that people hate it so much is we think that when we're in that needy, vulnerable, suddenly we have to network position, everyone else like has it all figured out, and we're the only ones who don't. And poor us, we have to get out there and network. But you know what? That's just not true. However, as much as we dislike having to network, we will need to constantly do it. In fact, I'm going to make the case in the next slide about how much we need to do it throughout our life. The need to connect to new people, to find out information and get leads and introductions does not go away over the course of a life or over the course of even a job. Some reasons that I looked into for my book and this slide explains a lot. Just in brief, we change jobs much more frequently than people used to do. On the average, I think a standard job is now 3 to 4 years. More and more people are working independently and putting together projects and work for themselves from a variety of sources, which means you constantly need to be finding new business, new customers, new clients. We move around geographically. And by the way, we're all working longer. There's just the days of the gold watch at 65 were long past now. So for all those reasons, it's a lifelong endeavor. Fortunately, there is a better way to connect with more people and new people who can be part of your brain trust, a phrase I like very much to use, who can offer you advice and introductions based on their expertise, introduce you, by the way, to other people who will have even more of that, and who will also turn to you once you've made the connection for your guidance. So it's not a one-way street, and it's not that you're always the asker. The other important thing about the people that you make connections with is that when you have, you're on your quest for whatever it is, a job lead or an introduction, or finding out about a company, say, people can also help shape with their information, an outcome that is good for you by telling you the bad stuff, right? What might be a problem area, what might be an issue about that position or that role or moving to a new place, whatever it is, so that you can take in that information and then, adjust your quest and move along. So it's valuable to have negative information or information that it perhaps leads to a dead end, just so you can keep moving past that once you have it. I think, in essence, there are 3 parts to making great connections. One is I'm a big believer in one-to-one live conversation with someone that you don't know, not in the moment when it's a random thing, but when you have a reason to meet. When someone says to you, "You two should meet," or "I want to introduce you to so and so because they're going to be able to give you more information than I can." Make that face-to-face or video chat whenever possible, as opposed to even a phone call. Because that live connection, that live conversation, kind of seals in the degree to which you two feel connected to each other, even if every other contact after that is even by email. So related, if you can always make it a probability that you will say yes when you're offered introductions, or when someone randomly says, I think you two would like each other. Say yes more than no, and then follow through to have that meeting. It may yield nothing, but it might yield a lot. And then we'll talk about this a little more later, but it's very important then to keep and stay in loose touch with people over time, with people you already know, and also with new people that you meet. And as I say, I'll go into that a bit more soon. The first one I mentioned above, the live conversation. Social media has its place. I'm a believer in the genuine connections you can make over social media, but I personally would like to be one of these elephants right now. I think that's a wonderful depiction of having a live conversation. When you do, let me just say, you want to be you want to set up a conversation correctly with some context. You want to get acquainted before you barge in with your immediate, need or ask. Get acquainted first. Terry Gross uses the time-honored "tell me about yourself" as the magical door opener to conversation. Be personal and be personable so that it's not just feeling transactional. I think that's part of the problem with the kind of networking people hate. Then when we talk about defaulting to yes, be more open than not to meeting new people. It doesn't mean always saying yes. It doesn't mean filling up your calendar, but it does mean having, a more of an inclination to say, why not, right? I will also add here that if you are meeting, Joe or Mary, keep in mind, probably Joe or Mary are not going to offer you the single like perfect solution to your issue or your quest or your problem. They're going to they're going to offer a piece of the puzzle, and so you want to take that piece and then move along to the next piece of what you're trying to solve, and then also you will have a chance to help someone else. It might not be that Joe or that Mary, but it will be someone down the line if you stay in this default to yes mode, that you want to help someone else. I would also add it's critical with these introductions and these introductory meetings to thank people profusely and follow up on any leads or suggestions out of that initial meeting and conversation, so that you can kind of keep track of what has gone on. So keeping in loose touch, it's really, this is just my phrase for occasional one-to-one contact with people even slightly. It's not a constant thing, as I say. It does not require a lot of time and effort. So let's look at how you might do that. A loose touch moment really can be, you've made note of their interest, this person who's new to you, their interest in a sports team or their interest in a topic related to your professional life. Say a simple thinking of you note, a message in whatever platform you both are on. How are you doing? We haven't talked in a while. Let's catch up. That is a moment of sort of you're being top of mind with someone. If you actually do want to catch up, make it a little more explicit and say, how's the next month looking? How's the next week looking? I'll be in town, or can we make time for a call? But the loose touch part is simply like, I'm thinking of you and this is for you. This article is for you. This GIF is for you, whatever it is. Of course, we live in an era when it's never been easier to stay in touch with people, all over the world, in fact, and more people than we ever could manage in person, and only offline. So it's very easy to have that loose touch moment, through a Twitter private message or through a LinkedIn message. I do write in the book quite a bit, have a whole chapter, in fact, on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram as being wonderful services to discover new people and be able to connect with them in a way. It doesn't have to be a mutual follow on any of those platforms for you to have that kind of connection. You want to learn how to use each one well, whichever ones you're using. You don't have to use all of them, and pay attention to how others are using them. Cartoon break. I have to share this because my friend Betsy Streeter created it a long time ago, and I really liked it and wanted to put it in a deck. And even though we're not all introverts, and introverts maybe wouldn't even want to show up at a career fair, I think we've all felt like this in terms of that next step of what do I do and how do I network. It's very relatable, I think. But in fact, using Betsy's cartoon again, I do think that introverts have three superpowers. And in it, this is a long part of a chapter in the book, but I will say in brief, these three superpowers are the ability to listen, because introverts typically do not want to go first. We want to hear from someone else so that we can kind of gauge where they are in relation to where we are. We want to get a little more intel on them. So, in fact, we have quite a good ability to listen. Two, if we're curious about people, we tend to be kind of visual observers as well, where we're looking at their style, their behaviors, their demeanor. Who seems comfortable and who puts people at ease, and who is anxious and who repeats themselves and who seems tightly wound. these kind of observations are very valuable in terms of kind of EQ, and also help you again gauge where you are in relation to someone and how you can either put them at ease or feel at ease with them. Being observant is a wonderful skill. And the third is simply curiosity, being curious about people, being curious about what makes them tick. I think introverts are good people watchers for this reason, and how varied they can be, and what unknown places other people's stories can take you. So I think being curious is a wonderful skill that helps you stay open to newness. A popular book these days on this is Carol Dweck's Growth Mindset. It's that kind of curiosity and openness to what's out there. Here is a quote that I just love, and I talk about it in the book. And if you get nothing else out of my ideas, maybe you'll like this one. Ivan Meisner said this. It's absolutely true. Networking is more about farming or gardening, if you'd prefer. It's the same idea. It requires planting. It requires watering, weeding, trimming, harvesting, thinning, wintering over, all these things that are an ongoing process to nurturing your garden or your farm. And think how different that is to the very transactional notion of hunting, right? That is a sort of one and done kind of situation in comparison to farming or gardening. So think about the contrast of those, and think about your own cultivating your network and your contacts in a way that it's reflective of farming or gardening. Here's a kind of a cheat sheet for you. If you remember that you're not the only one who's ever needed help from a stranger to advance in your quest, whatever it is. If you remember, every one of us is going to need that kind of help, and it will likely be from someone we don't know. This is why we have to go beyond our sort of trusted friends and family circles. As I suggest about farming or gardening, connecting with meaning is a long game. It is not a sort of overnight or day-long or week-long transaction or job hunt-long transaction, right? And practice, the sort of practice of staying in touch with people and folding new people into your kind of workflow, as it were, actually reduces the stress of doing it, so that it seems easy and natural, and you've built up the muscles for it. Underpinning this, and you might have gotten this from what I've said already, but it really helps to have an attitude of generosity and gratitude about people you want to help, people who want to help you. Both are going to be the case throughout your professional life and beyond. So be kind, default to yes. Savor the good conversations you have with people. They're some of the most rewarding ways to get to know people and to remember them. I mean, I thrive on the stories that other people have to tell me as I get to know them. Staying open and curious about others, and that's really the underpinning for what I think is more than a job hunting book. I have a chapter about job hunts, but it's really a bigger, longer, bigger palette for more kinds of connections that count.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Karen. I think you did a wonderful job of summarizing some of the key points that you talk about in your book. I especially like how you're talking about like always staying open, and that also in the growth mindset, on the topic of growth mindset, that it's never too late to build your network and start networking. You mentioned in, I think it was the last chapter.
Or too early.
Or too early, exactly. Start when you're young. You mentioned in your last chapter a lady that her network had gone cold because she had been in a job for so long, and then she was like, oh, I actually want to pursue other opportunities, and she built it back up. And I just thought that was really inspiring for those of us who maybe aren't experienced networkers, that you can get a lot of tips on how to be able to do this for yourself.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
All right. So I have a question for you. So networking can be a little awkward and uncomfortable. So what's an example of an awkward networking experience that you had, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I've been kind of doing this for so long that I think for me, the awkward uh, moments are when someone I don't remember comes up to me and says, "You helped me get a job," or "You introduced me to so and so," and it all worked out. And I love hearing that, but I don't remember, and maybe that's just a good reminder of how kind of a built up practice of it can be. Um, so I don't know that I have a good thing to share there, but I would say that there are times when I need to say to people, because I meet a lot of people, and I need to say, remind me where we met, right? Or remind me how we know each other. And that helps us then get into the flow, because otherwise we're going to have 5 minutes of conversation where I'm playing a guessing game. So that's not fun. Maybe for either side.
Yeah. I've learned to do that myself because, our initial instinct is to play it off like we know who that person is. But
Yeah,
honestly, it's much less awkward to just in the very beginning say, hey, can you remind me where we met and
yeah,
what we talked about? And then it kind of eases that tension immediately. So that's a great tip.
exactly.
So, after, I would say for me, after having gone through high school and college and living abroad and in the workforce for several years, I have a lot of loose contacts, probably a pretty large pool. So, how do you determine the flow of outreach for loose contacts? Is it something that you plan, or is it something that should come naturally?
Ideally, it should come naturally. I mean, you might, if you're starting really from scratch, you might want to make a list or something. But I think can reach a point where just someone comes to mind, that you just haven't thought about, or something that reminds you of that person. And again, it could be as simple as, a winning team, and you have a friend whose team that is, right, or something, or an Oscar winner, or whatever it is. And so, ideally, for me, it just comes to mind. I'm not organized enough to have a CRM about contacts, which I know some people do, and more power to them. But I think that if you don't have a specific need or question about somebody's company or job, or what their expertise is, then it should be more organic. If you do have that sense, this is who I want to get in touch with and why, that's fine too, to just kind of renew that acquaintance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one thing I wanted to touch on is the networking event, where it's an event hosted for networking purposes. And oftentimes it feels like everybody's trying to pitch you on their service or their product,
Yeah.
and it's kind of difficult to have some authentic conversations. So what do you recommend is the most natural way to network in a group setting?
Well, again, if it's like a trade show or something, and you're walking the show floor, and you're mildly interested in, the things that people are showing, let's say, take their card or their brochure, or whatever their information, and say, I'll look it over and get back to you. Again, you're only mildly interested. If you're more interested and you have a few minutes that indicates, oh, this might be something I want to know more about, again, trade get contact information and say, I'd like to follow up with you, and then do follow up about your specific question. But don't worry about, I have to meet so many people or collect so many cards. That way lies madness. So it really just kind of pay attention to what actually interests you in the moment, or what you came there to get, like if it's at a conference or trade show.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to that quality over quantity concept that you mentioned. I actually have a friend who she works for Toyota, which is quite a large organization, and she went to a conference for women in Toyota, and she told me, she goes, I felt like I wasn't really talking to anybody, and I saw everybody connecting and making all these friendships. And she goes, but then I actually had 5 really good conversations with people that I want to follow up with.
There you go.
And she was like, so it was a success. And I think that that actually is sometimes the way to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, you won't have a lot of time at a big public event, whatever it is, to have a truly in-depth conversation. You'll have enough, maybe as she did, to follow up. So it's fine to follow up. That's where the actual networking takes place. You know, more than in the moment when you're deciding that, oh, this is interesting enough to, go on with.
Yeah. So you have a great, very well detailed chapter 6 on social media platforms, how to use them for networking, different tips in order to how to reach out and build your profile. And what I was curious about is what your favorite social media platform is and why.
Well, I'm biased here because I have worked at Twitter for almost 5 years. I also have been on Twitter for about 10 years. So I still am a big fan of Twitter for what it offers in terms of a real-time flow of information and news and everything else that's based on who I follow. This is the key about Twitter. It makes it unlike the others. It is real-time, and your feed is shaped entirely by your interest. So if now you have absolutely no interest in U.S. politics and you want to fill it with kittens and puppies, you can do that, and that is what you're going to get back. And there's plenty of great material there too, I have to say. But that I like the real time aspect of it. I like to know what we collectively are talking about based on who I'm following. I find it, and it's also kind of changed the way that language and memes are used in ways that I just love as a communicator. So that's my favorite. I will say LinkedIn has grown in utility for me over time. I think it's enjoying a kind of resurgence in value, perhaps for a lot of people. Instagram has its place too in terms of like the richness of visual information. So I guess if I had to rank them for your question, I'd say Twitter number 1.
I actually, I thought it was so interesting when you reminded us in the book that Twitter, they invented the hashtag, which is kind of crazy because now it's everywhere and it's so much a part of our culture and our language, and it all originated with that one person who had an idea. Hey, let's track a conversation or a topic based on this hashtag. And I don't know, I think that's really neat to trace that all back.
Yeah, exactly. That was Chris Messina, who was an early user, in fact, not on the staff.
Oh, it was a user. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So there are a handful of women attending this webinar. So I wanted to talk about the confidence gap that you defined on page 179 of your book as the phenomenon in which women may over-prepare, worrying that they're not good enough, not ready for that next step, while men are comfortable winging an interview or embellishing their experience, all while exuding confidence that leads to a positive outcome. So what's a tip that you have for women who are attending this webinar to help them overcome this sense of self-doubt?
Well, I would say I have a saying in the book, and I've actually, I should have brought it to show you. I have some swag I've made. I have a little stress ball and stickers that say, "It's just coffee." And I have said that to women friends who say, I'm not ready for that introduction yet because I have to study everything and I have to have mastered a world of information before I can meet someone who is not hiring me, by the way, but who is someone who has some information about the company or the job or the field or whatever. And I say, it's just coffee, just have a conversation where you're personable and you're talking about your interest. So don't over prepare. In other words, there's a time for over preparing, and that is a job interview. But ahead of that, be open to meeting people for just a conversation, just coffee, as it were. I guess that would be my advice.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because networking is kind of like dating. You get all these preconceived notions and you get all nervous about being prepared to go on a date, but it's just dinner. So just like with networking, it's just coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
Too funny. So lastly, I wanted to end on this article that you referenced in chapter 7, the one about networking written in 1997 by Tom Peters. So I
Hmm.
was skimming through it this morning, and it pretty much foreshadows a lot about what life is like today, even though it was written 20 years ago. So how have you seen networking change over the past 2 decades, and how have you seen it change, and how have you seen it stay the same?
Well, I'm glad you brought up that article. It's called "The Brand Called You," and he was really writing about how people are presenting themselves more and more as a brand. A word now we're comfortable with this idea, but at the time it seemed quite radical that you yourself are the package of interest and style and just everything that represents you. He was also again foreshadowing the notion of people basically working for themselves, right? Even if they're in a company, they have to be their own kind of agent, as it were, inside a company, or obviously if they are independent and consultants and so on. Um, so he definitely foreshadowed that notion that we're so much used to now in everything in the world of politics and journalism. You see reporters and commentators who have their own brand regardless of the outlet. Those of us who consult and move around, we want to be known for certain things and have certain things associated with us. The obvious thing that has changed, of course, is online media. When he wrote that, the internet was a fledgling sort of commercial operation, and people were just getting email. Um, so the big change is not only kind of the universality of email, but then also the social layer on top of it, and how much further one could extend one's brand in all kinds of ways. And we see this with creative people on Instagram and people who are known for certain style of things they do or don't do on Twitter, that kind of thing. So that's the big change. But I think the basic idea is I really think it's a great article to go back and read. I have a resource section in the book that includes a link to that in the book actually, but also on my website where I have the resources listed and linked to. But yeah, it's now more than 20 years old.
Yeah, well, on that note, I highly recommend all of you check out Karen Wickre's, my apologies, I misspelled it or mispronounced it earlier. Karen Wickre's book, Taking the Work Out of Networking. And you can visit it on our website, bkp.al/taking the work out of networking, to purchase this book for your organization. Or you can send me an email, michelle@book-pal.com, to learn more. We'll send out the recording for this webinar later this week or next week. And also, you can check out our landing page that's in the link at the bottom to see the full listing of upcoming chats that we have. The next one is February 28th with Paul Napper and Anthony Rayo, the authors of The Power of Agency. So thank you so much, Karen, for being with us. I really enjoyed your presentation and our conversation.
Thank you.
And yeah, all right. And thank you guys for attending.